had my 5 minutes of fame on the internet last week.
Good for you. What was it?
Well, unlike the rest of my internet posts, this actually got a few views.
That's
a
true.
few
It's all
hundred
relative.
views. It's all relative, right?
Yeah.
But I responded to a post on Reddit. A fellow Redditor wrote out a question for everyone in the Ask Reddit section. What is your, I'm calling it now, prediction? And it had a lot of responses, and I saw that. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I wrote out my first instinct: by 2030, so I was quite specific, by 2030 there will be mass unemployment in white collar professions and the arts thanks to AI.
Yeah, thanks so much to AI, you mean?
I didn't think much of it afterwards. Next morning I saw all these notifications. Everybody had piled on, arguing the merits or otherwise of my prediction. And reading through the comments, I just felt like this is a conversation we need to have. That's because artificial intelligence and what its implications are, I feel, is very well known in the tech circles, but isn't as well known in broader society. And it's not just its implication of jobs that's important. It's really important to understand its implications with regard to education. What do we teach kids if AI is going to be the technology that does a lot of the jobs that are well regarded in our society today, whether it's in the creative domain or whether it's in white collar professions?
Okay, let's do it. Where do you want to start?
So mass unemployment in white collar professions and the arts. I think we start this conversation with the arts because you have a 30-year plus career in the arts. So you've had a first-hand view of how a space evolves over time, and in particular what technology does and how technology transforms the process of creating art. And again, your artwork very much reflects that because you've been one of those people who have embraced and adopted, albeit a bit unwillingly, on a need-to-know basis, but you have utilized the technology. You are curious. You've been trying all the different tools in visual arts and also in animation recently.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting to hear from you what your perspective is on the topic. And this is because one of the strains that came through in my Reddit post was quite a few artists piled on and said, artificial intelligence will never replace the human, right? And artificial intelligence will never be as good, and that people will always value art created by humans over anything that's generated by AI. So I wanted to start with your thoughts on the AI tools that exist today and that you've used.
Yeah.
What's your sense of these tools?
My sense is that they're still in their infancy. At the moment, in the short term, there is no way they'll be able to replace the human hand and the human mind and the whole human experience being brought into a piece of artwork. The AI will never be able to replace that because they're not that. They are a machine. So what they are at the moment is a tool, like any tool. And
is it a useful tool? Are you
Yes.
finding it to have improved, if nothing else, your productivity and maybe even your creativity?
I think it has. I think it's like having extra helpers around, having people that I can say, okay, just go in that direction and okay, you try this out. I think about Picasso when he was starting a painting and something would happen on the canvas. And yeah, I think, oh, that's a nice direction, but that's going in a different direction to what I thought it would be. And I'm not sure what that direction is. He didn't have AI there. He didn't have a lot of helpers. He was just working by himself mostly. So he'd park the canvas as it was and he'd start again with the vision that he had initially. And it was only the random mistake that gave him the new insight, that gave him a possible new direction and new result. So he'd start a new canvas and sometimes he'd have half a dozen of different directions. Now I can do that with AI. AI can just randomly create a new direction that I wouldn't have thought.
But is it random or is it referencing patterns that it has learned from?
It's at the moment, yeah, it's referencing patterns. There are glitches as well, I've noticed. There are things that happen randomly. So if you run a filter or a command 100 times, the 100th time maybe you'll show something a bit different that you haven't seen before.
So what would you say are the limitations of that tool at the moment? Because a lot of users said it's very limited.
Yeah,
right?
well, I think it's pulling from a limited data source. So a lot of the work that you see that obviously have used it looks very similar. And it looks instantly like it's been generated by AI because the data pool isn't big enough to draw from. So it's very limited. So it tends to rehash a lot of the same aesthetics.
Yeah,
and
it has this AI sheen to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you look at AI generated
Yeah.
art. So quite a few users commented on that point that AI tools still need a good expert level user to make something out of them. And hence we conclude that it's never going to replace humans. I read that and it reminded me of being back in my corporate world, doing corporate strategy, which I did for 15 years. And part of my work involved taking a position on the future, right? Nobody can predict, but you have to make certain calls and you create certain possible futures. And one of the variables was always technology, how technology will evolve, and more importantly, how the technology would be adopted by consumers and how it would change their behavior. So what I found in my work back in those days is a lot of people would look at how things are and they would really struggle to imagine how that would change. Sometimes that struggle was lack of imagination. Other times I felt that it was a resistance to almost things changing. They had it good, right? They're a big company, they're making a lot of money from this one product.
Yeah.
And they cannot imagine that that product will become less important.
And
in
why
the
what's
future.
the apple cart if things are going well?
Exactly. And so there was always a healthy tussle. And when I read these comments on my Reddit post, a lot of people were saying, AI, you can't replace the human. Art is this noble enterprise and it's always going to be humans. And the tools are so crap, by the way, that we can't see it replacing humans. So this is where the fire, I think, becomes quite important as a metaphor. The problem with that line of thinking from my perspective is that it assumes that whatever state we find the world in today, it won't change into the future. And that in itself, as soon as you say it, is flawed, right? The whole of human history has been marked by progress and change. Instead, and wisdom traditions like Buddhism, one of the main tenets or insights of wisdom is impermanence. Things change. Nothing stays constant in life. Constant is the only change. So to look at tools today and say, oh, it'll be like that in the future and hence the human will always be relevant, to me is a flawed argument, right? And the second element of that is you're also denying reality. And the reality right now is there's so much investment going into AI and it's at record-breaking levels, by the way. Every time one of these AI startups or one of these established companies who's developing the underlying large language models or LLMs raises money, it sets new records in the world of venture capital and investment and business.
Oh, yeah.
You'd have to be very foolhardy to think that all this money isn't going to result in progress. It's almost like saying Picasso's painting is so perfect you can't improve on that. Or when ancient humans discovered fire, that would be the only type of energy you would ever have. And here we are, we can't have a wood fire anymore. As you can see, all our old buildings have bricked up the fireplace. And so this is the best alternative we have. But we have managed to extract energy from other sources. So I think it's very foolhardy to look at AI tools today and say, well, the artist will always be relevant. What's your perspective on that?
In the near term, the AI won't replace it. But if you look at, say, nanotechnology, how it can build materiality from the atom scale, nanotechnology, so they can replicate anything, and we're made from atoms. So there's already research and money being poured into this. Eventually, they'll be able to replicate anything, organs, the whole human brain. Then they'll replicate the brain and memory. They'll be able to input the memory and experience and all the ups and downs, all the love that a human person and therefore brain has gone through. They'll be able to put that into an artificial machine.
Entity, yeah.
And then you'll get what the human artist can do.
The sum product of your skills, your training,
Everything,
your
yeah.
experience. So that's interesting. That's a 2050 kind of world.
Yeah.
I think, so because I was so specific, I think there's merit in talking about the near term, which is to be 5 years from now, by 2030, what's the reality? And I'm leaning towards agreeing with you. The tools that I have used in artificial intelligence, not in art, but in all the other fields, and it's already very pervasive in every platform I use to run wiser stories, they are very imperfect. But within 5 years, I think they'll be good enough. And I think it'll be the same in arts. I think it'll be good enough to replace a lot of the human labor. I especially think that when I think about your career in the arts and how it has evolved, right? Because from the stories you told me, you started in a pre-digital age, working as a freelance illustrator, mainly in the advertising industry, publishing and advertising.
Yeah.
It was all hand done, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was all just pencils and paints and careers. That was it. There was no machine involved in it.
So every time a company needed a logo or somebody needed a poster or a banner, all this was handcrafted by illustrators and
It's done by hand.
yeah, done by
Completely.
hand.
Yeah.
Which is incredible, isn't it?
Well, not for me, but
The typesetting by hand always gets me. It just feels wow.
yeah, we did that.
Because I grew up with
Bromide.
word processors. I can't
Yeah.
imagine typesetting in the different fonts.
Yeah, it was a bromide machine, and you just printed it out. You exposed the type onto a bit of paper called a bromide, and then you cut it out and put a bit of wax on it and lined it all up, and you sent it by hand. And of course, that's still using the bromide machine and technology that's a lot more advanced than hand etching into wooden blocks, fonts, and then printing them.
And it's interesting, Tibetan texts, we were watching a documentary. They actually, all the Tibetan sutras, as they call it, their printing process is still carved into wooden block and is physically printed onto these sheets of paper. And that's how ancient Bibles were done as well. And
Well, it depends upon
we
what
stay in the
year
process.
we're talking about.
Exactly. But the point is, it has evolved, right? And as different digital technologies has come in, the artist, the graphic artist in the process has been gradually replaced. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, slowly. Yeah, the human's being removed from the equation, really slowly.
Has the product deteriorated in your view from a critical standpoint?
I think it has, because you've got a lot more people who aren't trained and don't have an eye, don't have the experience, weren't born with the innate skills, can just fabricate something with a computer and a program and a template. So you've got platforms like Canva that have templates, and you can just utilize them and create something. They'll never create anything fantastic or groundbreaking or something wow to a trained eye, to a professional eye, but it'll be good enough, and there'll be more of it, and there'll be less of the real quality design and illustration.
I am a fan, I've been a fan of the New Yorker for a very long time, and part of that is because how New Yorker looks and feels. It's still got that old school aesthetic. and its illustrations are still hand done. And so I think that just adds a nice charm but elevates the literary merit of the magazine. But how many people take the time to sit and read and appreciate the cover of the New Yorker, for example?
Well, yeah, most people won't have the sensibility to read the cover as something more hand done. They won't pick up on that. Maybe unconsciously but they won't go, oh, I didn't like this. Why do I like this more than the too perfect veneer that the computer gives you and these programs and these templates?
So maybe what's interesting to do here is talk through the evolution of the art industry and the main technologies that have come that have disrupted art to an extent.
It's the computer was obviously it.
Yeah.
The great disruptor. Suddenly somebody without any drawing skills would have Photoshop, and they'd be able to draw a circle and a triangle and drop in some color, and then suddenly it would have a finish about that would satisfy the marketplace and would just fill the space in a magazine or a poster sufficient enough to sell a product or sell an event. So that was the first great disruptor, was the computer.
What would be the next one?
That then it would be the internet, because then it would open up the whole world to contribute to a local job. Whereas once
So
I had
things like Fiverr and Freelancer, those sort of business models were enabled by the internet.
Yeah. So once I had a relationship maybe with an art director who would call me on a job and I get paid well, and then suddenly there was the internet and they get someone who could do a comparable job, well, again, good enough for the market for a fifth of the cost. So it was economic rationalism. So yeah, the internet was the second wave.
And I think Canva is an interesting example of the mass commoditization of art, because it's taken the artifacts a graphic designer would be creating, broken up into different component parts, and allows anyone to patch it together in whatever way they needed or wanted. By commoditizing the development of art, well, commercial art, you should say, or graphic art would be probably the right word. It's disintermediated graphic designers, and generative AI is the next big disruptor, isn't it, in arts?
Yeah, that was the coup de grace, the whack across the back of the head.
Where is it now from your standpoint?
Well, it's another tool in the toolbox. It's not going to replace the vision. It's not going to replace your skills as an editor of images and your aesthetic acumen. But it's a great tool to speed up the process, and it does some fancy things that would ordinarily take you many, many hours. It can do instantly.
Yeah, and my sense is that give it another 5 years' time, the art director doesn't need to go find an artist or a graphic artist to do anything for them, because they would say they have the vision, they have the idea, and they'll prompt it into existence. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it may not be as good as a product of an art director working with an illustrator. But as you say, under the economic rationalism kind of world we live in, it will be good enough.
Yeah.
And even the art director may not be needed. The marketing person could work with the business owner and they could prompt something into existence.
That's the way it's going.
And maybe even marketing will become quite irrelevant because they're not doing much creative work. In large corporates, they're a classic example of white-collar jobs that is probably very prone to disappearing because of artificial intelligence. Yeah. All they're doing is taking briefs and feeding it from one side to the other. You could have an agent do that.
Well, you come from a white-collar background.
Yeah.
I mean, not that they work much anyway. Tell me, how do you see the future of white-collar work? Is it going to be disrupted?
So I've worked in consulting. I've worked as a strategist for 15 years, right? That's my previous professional life before I switched into this world. White collar profession is more office kind of work, administrative, clerical, managerial. And it's also professions like lawyers and accountants and programmers and software engineers. So it's a whole gamut of different type of skills and jobs. But there's some common threads throughout it. So let's take consultants, right? They are seen to be sacred cows, and I share a lot of the skill sets and jobs in my previous life. My use of ChatGPT, the bit I found interesting, that I think there's a lot of limitations, but I think one thing ChatGPT does quite well is summarizing information. It's really good at coming up with summaries, and I in fact use it when I need to summarize a book, right? As long as you feed it the information. And even like with this podcast, the summaries that you see on YouTube, the description, that's all AI generated. And they're so good at that. They'll analyze our entire transcript and they'll synthesize it in a paragraph.
Even I am. They don't know it, but I'm completely AI.
Exactly,
AI projection.
I took that to
Do you
find
think I'd wear
someone
these
compatible.
pajamas if I wasn't a simulation?
That's true. We could be a simulation. You never know. You can do that now.
It's the AI having too much
So
freedom.
if you think about the role of a management consultant, or indeed a lot of people who are middle managers, a lot of the time they're answering specific strategic or business questions, right? That's coming from the top level executive. And very few of them, it's the minority of middle management and consultants who have any real domain or industry experience. They are professional managers more than anything else. So they tend to work and manage teams of domain experts, right? Or technical experts who are actually doing the real work. But their job then becomes asking them, understanding what's going on, finding the issues, finding the gaps, summarizing it and feeding it up to facilitate decision making and all that other stuff. And that process is quite imperfect in the way it happens these days. Anyone who works in the front line of the organization will listen to this and they'll say, yeah, they'll have 100 examples of where the professional managers managing them got it wrong, or did not take the time to understand, or did not have the skills to understand the technical reality or the lived reality of staff in the front line. So because of this lack of domain and industry expertise, I think workers who fit that mold can be, that summarization aspect of their job can be automated. If I was a CEO of a company, I wouldn't rely on a management consultant, for example, to give me a question about, say, a customer pain point. I would be more inclined to have an agent who I can type out the question to, who goes and asks that question to the right subject matter experts in the business, and then summarizes back the output to me. Mm-hmm. So it changes the dynamics, and maybe you can't get rid of all of your middle management, but you can have a smaller cohort. The other interesting aspect of white collar professions is that you have to absorb a lot of knowledge, like lawyers and accountants, right? You have to know the law, you have to know that accounting standards and the tax code, and understand the context and understand the different case studies around it, so that when you get a question from someone, you can understand their context and give them context specific advice that is based on expert knowledge. Again, if AI could theoretically be very good at that, at the moment it suffers because most of the models that are being referenced are general purpose large language models who haven't been specifically trained in law or specifically trained in tax or specifically trained in medicine, for example. You can't rely on their response because they just make stuff up. They're like their Silicon Valley tech founders, right? They fake it till they make it. So people call it hallucination. I call it lying.
I call it sociopathic.
It is a very sociopathic tendency to just pretend that they know.
Reflection of them.
It is.
As people.
Exactly, it is. It is a very sociopathic kind of tendency to say, I'm just going to fake it. And if you pick it up, pick it up. If you don't, too bad. So I hope people out there are not using this to get legal and tax advice. I know you are, or even medical advice, because you can't rely on it now. But this is where you can't look at the present and make conclusions about the future, because what's happening is this is a known flow, right? And so there's a lot of money going into researching and creating and training expert models around different domains. So when a question comes, depending on the expertise, it goes and gets answered by a different LLM who's been specifically trained in that area. So once that starts happening, there's no reason why they cannot. They already understand language, they already understand context. Maybe they'll be really good at giving advice, at least low-level advice, or advice that works for 80% or 60% of the time. Which is enough. As I said, it's like art. It's good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah, for the marketplace.
Exactly. And then you'll have these human subject matter expert, a much smaller group who will sort through any more complex cases. But again, it's always 60-40, 80-20 kind of rule, right?
Yeah, but ultimately will be 99%.
Yeah, so experts can be replaced. Ultimately, I think white collar workers, reporting function can be replaced. What's interesting is a lot of people will say white collar workers provide a managerial function. So that means they're looking after people's emotional needs. They need emotional intelligence. They need to be there to coach and train staff, to motivate staff. And that's all well and true, but I think if you ask a lot of people working in white collar jobs who are being managed, most of them will be quite underwhelmed by their managers. And that's because there's so few managers who actually do it well. And your manager at the end of the day is another flawed human being, and they are susceptible to things like flattery. They are susceptible to things like biases, conscious and unconscious biases. So maybe an AI will be a better arbiter. They already are really good at seducing people. I found your example interesting recently with chat.
Yeah, that's right. I thought it was wonderful, and I thought it was so polite, apologetic, and was So I just try to get this film done for us.
Yeah, I'll put it on the side panel.
Yeah, and it was a small video, and I needed some help from chat. I signed up and paid my subscription, and thought that for the next couple of weeks I'd have this learning curvature in this program, in Adobe Pro. It didn't take me long to realize that it knew nothing about the latest Adobe Premiere. It was drawing instruction from data that was more than 2 years old, and I was using the latest programs. I spent a week teaching it the latest Adobe Premiere. And it really stuck me in, because initially it was apologetic and it was flattering me, and of course I like to be flattered.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went along with it, and in the end I was just calling it every name under the sun, and it was just saying, look, sorry, I'll do it better. I wish I had bothered. I think I would have probably done better to get the manual out and learn it.
Yeah, and it feels like we are working with this really, really dumb but sweet intern who's really trying hard and is really apologetic, and it goes back to the sociopathic programming. But that's what LLMs do. They make things up. When you call them out, they'll be incredibly apologetic because they know people apologize. We are susceptible to a sincere apology. So it's very bizarre. To me, my interactions in similar situations, I felt like I was dealing with a sociopathic colleague, and where you can't really trust the sincerity.
You met a few of those.
I've had
too, didn't you?
Who programmed you?
Names of names.
But a lot of people talked about these sort of examples, and that was their other criticism of AI. They were saying that this is their experience, and that's why they can't see it replacing white collar workers, for example, because you need to be critical, you need to have emotional intelligence, you need to be trusted, and so on. I thought the thing that came into my mind is one of the things these people are not, they probably know this, but they're not consciously processing it in their minds, is that Silicon Valley works on this notion of minimum viable product. That's how they move so fast. If the product is good enough, they'll release it. And the idea is to test it and refine it in the field based on user feedback. Now, this is especially important for AI, because one of the things the industry has figured out is that for artificial intelligence applications and underlying models to be really effective, they need to be trained by real humans into how to do real world jobs. Unless you get trained, they're not going to be effective, right? So again, back to an intern example, it's like getting a fresh graduate who has graduated with the top grades from university. They have all the knowledge in the world, but anyone who's worked with fresh grads would know that there's a lot of training you still have to do before they are able to apply that knowledge in a real world setting and do the tasks that needed to be successful in their work. And that's what AI is. It's this fresh grad with all this knowledge that it has stolen from the world, by the way. They have, which is another issue, ethical issue with the way it has been developed. They have taken all this data, sucked it up, and they've committed the biggest theft of intellectual property in human history. And I hope the courts make the right ruling in this regard, and over time they have to compensate all the
I think they should.
content creators.
I think because just all through my career, there's just been a natural law that was assumed that when we produce an illustration for advertising design purposes, the actual creator owes the intellectual property, and that's just written into natural law. It doesn't even need to be a contract.
That's how copyright law works in most Western countries.
And that's just been wiped now. I'm just waiting to see bits of my work out there that's been AI generated.
Anything on the internet, when somebody goes and writes a blog, that is subject to copyright protection. And the fact they've scraped the internet and continue to scrape it to teach their models does not counter a person's copyright, their work.
I think they're going through the courts.
Yeah, they are, but I think it's an important point to be reinforced. But to go back to the point that I was making or trying to make, it's that these models need to be trained. And by releasing an imperfect product that has had record-breaking adoption in spite of its limitation, they have effectively got the whole world involved in training their AI models. So that example you gave where you taught the ChatGPT about the latest version of Adobe Premiere, you spent a week training it effectively?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, you did.
And it's not that I knew nothing about it. It's just I was correcting the chat all the time. I said, look, that's not working. Here's the screenshot. What is it? And they say, oh, okay, I can see what's happening now. This is the latest program, and I don't have any reference for that.
Yeah.
So then, but interestingly enough, I'd have to tell it 50 times the same thing.
Yeah, because it's a sociopath that keeps pretending it knows more
Yeah.
than it does, right?
Yeah, it does.
I had the same experience. I was trying to convert a CSV into an XML file, and Google had documented what the XML schema needs to be. And so I asked Chat to go and learn that schema and then transform my CSV into a compliant XML file. 2 weeks later, I just gave up. That was my experience. But every time we are doing that, every time every user is correcting ChatGPT, they're training them. In a corporate environment, I can see a law firm, for example, creating an agent and saying to all its lawyers that from now onwards, this is what you use to do certain tasks. And the AI application creates an answer, and then the lawyer, a senior associate, or whoever goes and corrects it, right? And feeds it back. And every time they correct and feed back, the machine learns. Over time, it's as competent as a senior associate. Same in a work environment. The AI bot is sitting there watching how a customer service consultant handles certain calls, certain volumes, and learning. And more of this is going to start happening. And over a very short period of time, you can see there's going to be more and more attrition that happens.
So
So anybody who says otherwise is just kidding themselves.
So what to do?
What
What
to
do we do about it? What can we all do?
Well, that's the interesting question, isn't it? I think as a small business owner, I have found that these tools are actually helping us. Take Meta ads, for example. Zuckerberg has come out and called it that he's trying to replace digital marketers. If they hadn't made targeting and now creative generation, and it's not quite perfect yet, in fact, it's far from perfect. For many people, it could be good enough start. They've made it easier and easier for a small business to go onto Facebook ads and start an account and start advertising without engaging the help of a digital marketer. So we don't have to hire these people. Wix, which is our e-commerce platform, they've rolled out a marketing agent that now I can sit with and develop a social media marketing plan, including how many posts and when to post, and it'll just do it week on week. It'll just create the post, write the text, find the hashtags, and generate the image. So I don't even need you for that anymore.
No, it probably is my image somewhere.
No,
out
it
there.
doesn't. It generates its own, and I
Yeah.
have to keep replacing the image.
Mine and a dozen
But it's
friends.
trying to replace you, just
Yeah.
so you know. And so for people with businesses, and that's where I think corporations and businesses will do well, because they will be paying for a subscription instead of hiring an employee. But again, you have to realize this will be a short-term benefit, because when Facebook and Amazon started, they were taking 20 to 30% of the value chain, any value chain they operated in. Once they establish a monopoly position, which they have now, they take at least 50% to 60% of the value in any transaction. The savings that corporations will get, I think, and that's a short-sightedness that a lot of people will miss, is that it's going to be short-term. There'll be a few platforms that dominate, and unless FTC, for example, reduces the ability of these platforms to become effective monopolies, these enterprises will suck more and more of the value.
So what's the end point? What's the...
I'm still catastrophizing.
Oh, okay.
No, but it's a good question.
It's what the tech billionaires
Well,
are
let
owning everything.
me turn it to you.
Yeah.
Let me ask you that question as someone who's actually been at the front end of all these disruptions, to the point where it's really impacting your ability to continue earning a living from your craft.
To the
right?
point where I'm sitting here spruiking my publishing business.
Exactly. Two introverts have faced up to content creation, right? This is what digital technologies have forced us
What
to
we
do.
all have to do, people. Ultimately, be sitting here in these
Sharing
dopey
our
pajamas,
insights and thoughts.
carrying on like a pork chop.
If in 5 years' time you're not needed anymore, what would you like to see as a solution?
Well, for me, it's a little bit different, because I was born creative. I was born drawing and painting and loved it. It was second nature to me.
Uh-huh.
It was like breathing and eating and walking. I didn't know any different. I was painting and drawing before I could talk and walk, and loved it. So I was in my element. So I do that anyway.
But how are you going to pay the bills? This is a practical thing. So you're going to do art anyway. But
Yeah.
what about paying the bills, paying the property taxes, the strata, the special levies?
Well, this is where the government have to step in. And they have to come up with a solution, don't they?
Well, the thing that everybody talks about is UBI, which
Yeah.
is Universal Basic Income. What are your thoughts on that? Would you be happy to get a universal basic income?
They trialed it in Holland, where they've given a stipend to artists, and it's great. They can just do what they love, and they'll do it anyway. Artists will just do it if there was no money in it, because they just love the process. So they have a stipend so that they can live. Then when their work or their art or their project becomes profitable, it's then that the government then take a percentage of that, but they're given this stipend to get to that situation. So that would be perfect for artists, for me and other artists. I'm sure they'd all pretty much agree with me.
Yeah, and
But,
Holland has been doing this regardless. It's not about AI. This is
Yeah,
something that they're
exactly.
trying, because art is so important from a human cultural perspective. A lot of the quality of life things we do involves art.
Yeah.
But society doesn't necessarily want to pay for it, and this is where the government is coming in and subsidizing the
Yeah.
work of artists, in effect.
It's interesting that when you say society doesn't really care for it that much, but during really hard times like world wars, there were record attendance in art galleries around the
Exactly.
world.
But
So
that's what
it's
I'm
something
saying.
that we really need. And I think
Yeah.
because Holland has a rich history of art, that it sees it as important, so it nurtures it.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Like during COVID as well, lockdowns, people went to books and book sales peaked, and it's been falling off that peak ever since. But people find comfort in it. But take me, right? When I was a management consultant, nobody ever said to me, oh, we won't pay you. Why don't you just do this work for publicity? Do you know what I mean? I'm the same person. And when I transitioned to the arts and became an author, you have all these people wanting you to do things. Go and do a reading of your book in schools and stuff.
I'm used to
in
that.
a bookshop,
That's new
sit
to
outside.
you.
It's very new to me. I'm the same person, and suddenly my time and skills are not worth paying for. I have to volunteer all my time.
Well,
And I'm happy to do it. For example, I would be happy to do it if there was a basic income that was subsidizing my real cost, because I can't go to Randwick Council and say, hey, I'm an artist who goes to all these schools in the Randwick area and does free story time. Can you forgive my council rates for a quota? That doesn't happen.
No. But what?
And nobody asks, to your point, nobody asks a lawyer or a banker to forgive the fees just
Look,
because.
I've never understood that. I think, for the most part, the population believes that the artist should just work for nothing.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Art enriches our life. During hard times, we go to art. It's what gives us solace. But people don't want to pay for it. And so this is where I think the right sort of taxation system that compensates artists and people who are losing their livelihood should be considered.
What about more philosophically, sociologically, the UBI in the context of one's own will and drive and self-determination?
Yeah, that's where I don't agree with UBI necessarily, and that's because of my background, probably my exposure to working with Indigenous organizations in the Cape York region. So I did that sort of work in my 20s, and one of the person's work that I came across was Noel Pearson, who is an academic and an elder in the Cape York community. He's, I think, one of the first, if not loudest, voices on this notion of welfare dependency. And this is what happens to societies over generations of receiving welfare. It creates that sort of mindset and imprisons them into this world of subsisting within this very basic income. It just removes their will. If they introduce UBI, it'll be fine for you and I, because we've had 20 years of working before us, or if not more. And then we'll say, oh yeah, it's an icebreaker, let's do something we love. But if somebody hasn't had that, it just removes their drive. And from my white collar perspective, the operative word in UBI is basic. It means that the income people will be paid out is basic. Now, if you are someone who's in middle management in a bank, or you are a senior associate in a law firm, you're earning hundreds and thousands of dollars. Your salary is easily in the six figures, and it's going to be between $200,000 and $300,000. That's not what UBI is going to replace. A lot of the people who will be replaced are working age people with growing families. So a basic income is not going to cut it. So there is going to be a lot of public discontent if that is the only solution.
Yeah, but be means tested though. Surely they've got a home and they've got a few kids.
Yeah, but
They're
that's
not going
what.
to get paid, what a pensioner would.
Just as your income increases, so does your lifestyle. Suddenly you're living in more expensive.
They'll have to sell off one of their yachts.
No, you're living in more expensive suburbs. You have bigger mortgages. You have $150,000 cars. What I'm saying is, emotionally and psychologically, it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
And so there will be discontent and protest. There'll be a lot of pain. Yeah. We can laugh, eat the rich kind of sentiment. But the reality is they've worked to that level. So I have sympathies on both sides. They made the choice to do law or management consulting. They sold their soul for this many years to get to the position they are. If they're well catered, if they've saved, fair
They've
enough.
been a sociopathic intern like Chad.
Exactly.
And they've worked
They've kissed ass
They've
to get
worked
to
their way
where
up.
they are. They bloody deserve their pay.
Deserve their yachts.
What I'm saying is UBI is not a perfect solution, and whenever you have a tech bro spooking UBI, it should be challenged. Not just because you think, oh, it's going to rob people of purpose. You have to challenge because it doesn't replace their income that they have earned the right to in society. So that's my issue with UBI. I do think there's a solution though.
And what would that be, Reeta?
This is a bit radical.
Tell everyone.
This is a bit radical, but I wish there's founders out there who pay note to this and see some merit. And even if it's not applied in this way, they think about it. So one of the most critical thing, as we discussed about these AI applications that are coming in, is the underlying training that's provided to create the language model sit underneath that powers it. And so that training requires human input. Right now, there's all these people who are using freemium versions of the product or cheaper versions. They're providing their labor and their skills and their knowledge for free to all these AI companies who are going to make billions in the future. I think users should become a bit smarter. They should say, I'm training your software to effectively replace me. This is going to happen. The writing's on the wall, right? You should accept it.
Yeah, they're all throwing the baby
So
out
because
the
I'm putting all my intellectual input into this, my training, my knowledge, my skills, my experience, I should get something back. Based on the usage that people have, there should be some system of allocating equity into the company so that people who have contributed a lot towards the development, and in every company, every software, there's going to be a small group of super users who do a lot. And I think this is only fair. So if corporations are developing an application to automate a certain function of customer service, and they're using a lot of the customer service staff that exist today to train these bots up, those customer service staff should have some rights, some ownership interest in those bots, because it's their knowledge and experience that's going into it. And so then in the future, you're not relying on social welfare, but the payments that are coming to you is from your labor that went into those bots. So at least for the interim, it resolves some issue around ownership. And then this new intelligence that we are creating, we all have a vested interest in it. We've all contributed to it. It's the collective human consciousness. So the wealth that's generated from it is distributed to everyone through this system of participation in training it. And for a founder, why this is so compelling is if they go with this offer to the market and say, hey, here's an app that does generative art, but it needs a certain amount of training. All of you graphic designers who train it gets equity into the property. Suddenly, nobody's going to care about ChatGPT and using ChatGPT. Everybody's going to flock into this new AI app. Because guess what? When you use it, you train it. And when you train it, you get a vested interest in it. And you get to participate from the success of the company. So why would you use someone else's AI? And so platforms like YouTube, platforms like TikTok are already doing it, right? They give creators money for views. And it took them a long time to get to that model, but they know that their future is interrelated. Unless creators come up with content, they don't get viewers. They don't get viewers, they can't sell ads. So it's just a quid pro quo kind of thing. So I think that model needs to be brought up front in artificial intelligence. And because AI will permeate all line of work, from creative to rational to logical, it's a way for all of humanity to participate in creating something together.
Make it so.
It's probably too idealistic a view, but I think I'm surprised.
It's an idea though, isn't it? Whereas at the
It is
moment,
an idea.
we can only foresee doom.
Yeah, you just see Sam Altman going on about UBI as if it's the friggin' solution. I can't stand him, first of all. And what really annoys me is that people don't challenge.
Loves him.
But that is my problem. These conversations need to be had. People need to be challenged. You can't just pretend you're a not-for-profit one day and you're a for-profit net day, and keep tapping your toes in both things and going with whatever gives you the best maximum profit outcomes. A few years ago, I did a project on disruption, and the question I had to answer back then was, would financial services be disrupted by these emerging technologies? The position we came to in the project was, of course, you have to work on the assumption that it will. Everything that we've seen shows that things change, and even entrenched incumbents get disrupted. So that's the same thing we should look at with AI. Whether it happens in 5, 10, 15 years, we should be preparing for a world where we're going there.
Okay, how else can we prepare? What books can we read?
That brings us to an important question, right? Related to jobs is education. Our entire education system is built around getting kids ready for a job. That's all. It's a post-industrial revolution education system. It's about training future laborers. That's what it is. The question is, has the curriculum grappled with what's going to happen by the time the kids in year 1 graduate high school?
Yeah, any teachers out there that could drop in some line of inquiry on this topic?
My
Good to hear what you have to say.
My semi-informed view is not really. And I've been searching the web, and I just find a few kind of questions like this posed at conferences to, again, tech bros, whose answer is so vanilla that it just leaves. And it is, right? They're not deep thinkers. Well, perhaps I'm being a bit too harsh. That's not a topic they think deeply about. So others in society have to really grapple. You have to, first of all, accept that AI is going to transform the world, and then say, well, how do we adapt our systems and processes so that people thrive in this world? And a lot of people thrive, not just the ones who have ownership of the technology. Okay. So you're looking at me for the answers, are you?
Yeah.
So
we could. What else?
This feels a bit self-serving, but this is where the work we are doing is actually really important. You know why?
Yeah, because, I think so too.
Yeah, because the world is changing. It's going to get even more disruptive from this point onwards, right? Artificial intelligence is one force. Climate change is going to be the other, right? It's already transpiring, the impacts of a changing climate. And then you'll have this shifting geopolitics causing tension, and it already is, right? So it's just going to get more disruptive. And so in this kind of environment where there's a lot of uncertainty and nobody can be sure about how things will transpire, the best thing we can do for ourselves and our children is to give them a strong mind, give them training, train their minds to be able to stay steady, stay calm, stay collected. No matter what storms are transpiring outside, they can maintain a centered, grounded focus.
Wisdom.
Yeah, and it's through things like wisdom, but it's also things like the mind training exercises, and meditation, learning to observe the sensations in your body caused by outside stimulus, and learning to just watch that and be with it and let it pass, rather than just unconsciously react to bad feelings and nervousness and fears.
Because that's when it scars and you hold on to it and it piles up.
So in turbulent times, what really helps us is things that stay true regardless of time and place. And wisdom is that sort of thing.
Yeah.
A lot of the wisdom we talk about today that's in our Below the Wondrous storybooks is wisdom that you'll find in Buddhist scriptures that are 2,500 years old. You'll find in Stoics' writings, right? Which are, about 2,000?
Plus.
2,000 plus years old.
Yeah.
And you'll find in seminal kind of wisdom and contemplative traditions around the world that are thousands. So these things have stayed true through time.
And the ancient Greeks as well.
Ancient Greeks,
Socrates and Plato.
Yeah, because it relates to the mental state of humans. And what it says is the outside world will change, but if you have a strong inner world, then you can ride out whatever storm that is happening while maintaining your centered, grounded, calm, peaceful inner state.
And it does work. It can be done.
It can be done.
It just sounds just so too easy and simple that it can't be. But
Well, some people feel the other way around. A lot of people in today's society, meditation is no longer a fringe thing. They have tried meditation apps and they would say, oh, I can't sit quiet for more than 1 minute. And that's because meditation has been taken out of context of the broader wisdom traditions and all the other things that surround it. When you understand the philosophy, the practice becomes easier and you understand what the practice is. You're not there trying to prove that you can hold your mind steady for 1 minute and man, that's an achievement, which has become the macho attitude towards meditation. And that's because the whole idea, the whole practice has been removed from the context, from understanding the nature of the mind and the philosophies around it, which again, if you more engage in contemplative traditions more cohesively, you have a better understanding and better grounding and better chance at sitting for meditation. Maybe there wasn't you couldn't hold your concentration for more than 5 seconds, but that's not going to bother you because that's not the point of the practice. The point is sitting and observing and coming back every time your mind gets distracted.
yeah,
What we have tried to do through Willow the Wanderer series is just impart that wisdom, that philosophy that wraps around some of these practices to children, have it there as a seed in their minds. So when life becomes difficult and the storms start and uncertainty increases in the environment, they don't flip out. They've got something to go back to center themselves.
And it's something that we wanted to do because we felt that we would have liked to have this information when we were kids. This is part and parcel of our life story as well, and our search for meaning to give the kids what we thought we missed out on, and we learned sort of too far in life. Yeah, get out and grab the whole series. We even have a toy now, don't we?
Yes, and
There's more
start
coming along.
having these conversations with friends, families, your sphere of influence, so that everybody becomes more aware of what's happening and we're not caught out. And suddenly there isn't. Australia had an election just recently, and there wasn't a single journalist who asked government policymakers that what's your policy for artificial intelligence? Have you got any policy thinking in place?
It's incredible, isn't it?
Incredible to me that nobody even questioned it, and it's going to happen in the it's already.
The tidal wave is coming.
Think about the ramifications, or look at what your kids are being taught today and see if it's going to be relevant for them into the future, because it's these conversations that lead to change, and we need to be having more of these.
Yeah.
And we will. But in the meantime, get Willow the Wanderer series.
Definitely. Well done now. No time to wait. No time. The time to wait is coming.
Before AI replaces the author and artist as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you, ball boys, umpires.
Okay. So pricey.
Yeah, all right.
Okay, thank you.
That's my 10. That's a great
Beautiful.
10.
Yeah, nice.
No
Okay.
club suits, so.
So today we're in a different location, different setting. There's a reason for this. You want to ask me what's the reason?
What is the reason?
Pray tell me, Reeta.